Chapter 7. Don't confuse a green frog for a guppy. The sexes of many animals incessantly call for each other during the breeding season, and not in a few cases the male endeavors thus to charm or excite the female. This, indeed, seems to have been the primeval use and means of development of the voice, as I have attempted to show in my Descent of Man. Charles Darwin, The Expression of Emotion in Man and Animals, Chapter 4, Means of Expression in Animals. Fechheimer is exactly the sort of business we like to buy. Its economic record is superb. You may be amused to know that neither Charlie nor I have been to Cincinnati, headquarters for Fechheimer, to see their operation. If our success were to depend upon insights we developed through plant inspections, Berkshire would be in big trouble. Rather, in considering an acquisition, we attempt to evaluate the economic characteristics of the business, its competitive strengths and weaknesses, and the quality of people we will be joining. Warren Buffett, Annual Letter to Shareholders, 1985. The Oracle from Omaha takes the crown for best investor in the world. He started managing $105,000 for family and friends in 1956 and has compounded it to $500 billion today. Who is the second best? Anthony Bolton is not widely known, but in my view he is the sole occupier of second place in the pantheon of all-time investment greats. He was the superstar fund manager from the United Kingdom with a track record rivaling Buffett's. Bolton managed the Fidelity Special Situations Fund for 28 years from 1979 until 2007 and achieved an annualized return of 19.5% when the market yielded about 13.5%. A sum of £1,000 would have compounded to £147,000 during his tenure. If there is a better dictionary definition of stellar, I have yet to see it. In 2010, he came back from retirement to launch a £460 million fund. However, the fund significantly underperformed the market and lost 14% over the next 3 years. Bolton had to leave the fund in 2014. How could a genius who had beaten the market over almost 3 decades suffer so dismally? Was it just bad luck, or did he slip up? If so, where? If this happened to Bolton, is anyone immune from such a fate? The blessings and perils of signals. If you are as ardent a fan of the National Geographic Channel as I am, some of or all the following scenes should be familiar to you. A male lion roaring to assert his dominance over a pride, female baboons with their bright sexual swelling indicating their readiness to mate, bees performing their waggle dance to show the direction and distance of flowers, a female elephant caressing her calf to soothe him, a deep-sea squid emitting light to attract prey, and a meerkat squealing to warn her family of a predatory eagle. All these are examples of signals, and no textbook on evolutionary theory is complete without a lengthy discussion on them. Signals emitted by a sender have explicitly evolved to alter the behavior of the receiver and are used to communicate with and influence the behavior of prey, predators, mates, competitors, friends, and family. A signal can take myriad forms: touch, sound, color, motion, light, odor, or some combination of these. No organism could live without emitting and receiving signals, but a misdirected or misread signal can also lead to death. Although evolution has honed the signal emitting and receiving skills and instincts of animals and plants over millions of years, the race to deceive a predator or beat a competitor for food or a mate is never over. This book is about an integral part of the financial services industry, an industry that deserves its reputation for dishonesty and deceit. Few have described the sad state of our industry better than Fred Schwed in his hard-hitting, timeless classic Where Are the Customers' Yachts? Those of you who suffered through the global financial crisis of 2008 have probably exhausted every cuss word for us finance folks. If you aren't an evolutionary biologist, you probably believe that deception is the sole preserve of our cunning species. Not so. Let's start with green frogs. Green frogs, like most animals, have a short window for mating. During this crucial period, males need to defend their territories aggressively to maximize their reproductive success. Larger males advertise their size and dominance by making calls, croaks, if you prefer, at a lower frequency than smaller frogs. Thus, a male green frog who is evolutionarily programmed to avoid larger and stronger green frogs will not enter a territory filled with low-frequency croaks. His brain equates low-frequency croaks with unbeatable rivals. What do you do if you are a small green frog? Live without a mate and die a virgin? No, sir. Some small green frogs have found a way to lower their signal's pitch, thereby communicating that they are larger than they actually are. This ability enables them to preserve their territories by fooling the larger males. Some small green frogs hijack a low-frequency croak to send a dishonest signal, thereby gaining evolutionary advantage. This dishonest signal is easy to produce and imposes a very small cost on the signaler, the small green frog. If you think the green frogs are devious little dudes, you should be suitably impressed with the shenanigans of the fantastic fiddler crabs. Fiddler crabs have gone one-up on green frogs by dishonestly signaling their prowess to females and other males. Male fiddler crabs have a single large claw that serves the dual purpose of fighting other males and attracting females. Researchers have found that females differentially prefer males with larger claws, and these well-endowed males also successfully deter other male rivals. When a male loses his large claw in a fight, he usually grows a new claw that is lighter in weight, slenderer, and weaker. However, its size can still be impressive, and it can look as potent as the previous heavier and deadlier claw. These regenerated claws fool both sexes. The females do not differentiate between these imposters and the males with the heavier, real claws. Even the males with the real claws don't pick a fight with males with lighter and weaker but impressive-looking regenerated claws. Researchers have found that up to 44% of males in a fiddler crab population can have regenerated claws. And you thought it was only us finance folks whom you can't trust? If you think dishonest signals are emitted solely by animals, think again. Plants are masters of deception. Since they can't run or hide, many of their survival strategies involve deceiving other plants or animals. Some of the best examples, or worst, if you happen to be a wasp, are certain species of Australian orchids. Australia has about 1,400 species of orchids, and around 250 of these have adopted the same strategy of deceiving male wasps to enable pollination. Here's how it works. When a female wasp who lives most of her life underground laying eggs is ready to mate, she emerges from the ground and emits a distinctive pheromone that attracts the males. Many males typically descend on a female and start copulating in a frenzy. Nothing out of the ordinary here. Okay, agreed, a bit disconcerting, but you know what I mean. Enter the orchid. Many orchid species have figured out a way to emit the same pheromone that a female wasp emits. What is the result? The male wasps end up copulating with orchid flowers, thereby brushing against pollen, which they carry to other flowers where the unfortunate wasps mate again and leave the pollen behind. I don't want to give the impression that the living world is replete only with hustlers and cheats. Unlike green frogs, fiddler crabs, and Australian orchids, male guppies and coral snakes lead a more upright life. Guppies populate the mountain forest streams of Venezuela, Trinidad, and Tobago. Whereas female guppies are plain and drab-looking, male guppies are quite colorful, and no two males have the same color pattern. I urge you to do a Google image search of male guppies to see how dazzlingly beautiful they are. Scientists have experimentally demonstrated that females have a clear preference for brighter and more conspicuously red males with greater quantities of carotenoid pigments. More on carotenoids shortly. But conspicuous coloration comes at a huge cost to the males, their life. More colorful guppies are also subject to higher predation. If the males have dull colors, they won't get to mate, but if they are brightly colored, they are likely to be hunted down. Talk about being between a rock and a hard place. Thus, brighter colors in a guppy are an honest signal of attractiveness to females. As Godin and McDonough succinctly state, the viability cost associated with bright conspicuous coloration in male guppies potentially reinforces for females the reliability of this sexually selected trait as an indicator trait of male quality. While a male guppy may attract predators by honestly communicating to females, the deadly coral snake deters its potential predators with its bright coloration. About 90 species of these fabulously colored and highly poisonous snakes are native to the tropics. They have alternating patterns of 3 colors, red, black, and yellow or white. This kind of aposematic, what a nice-sounding word from the world of biology, or conspicuous coloration is quite common among many poisonous plants and animals. They are essentially broadcasting honestly to their potential predators, don't you dare. But what would evolution be if not bizarre and fascinating? Non-venomous milk snakes kept as pets have almost the same coloration and banding pattern of coral snakes. I bet that if you put the photographs of these two species side by side, you would be unable to distinguish the poisonous one from the pet. Try it. This kind of dishonest communication is called Batesian mimicry and was first discovered in the 1860s by Henry Walter Bates in butterflies of Brazil. In Batesian mimicry, a harmless species mimics the coloration of a poisonous or unpalatable species to ward off predators. Milk snakes have successfully evolved through natural selection to mimic coral snakes, thereby ensuring their survival. I want to present a necessary qualifier here, which I will assert a few more times to avoid anthropomorphic confusion. The words honest and dishonest in the discussion so far do not communicate the intent of the signaler. They point to the effect of the signal on the receiver. When a signal fools the receiver, it is dishonest. When the receiver understands the signal for what it is honest. Neither the guppy nor the milk snake possesses the ability to dictate its body color. The orchid is not deliberately releasing pheromones, nor is the fiddler crab consciously building a large fake claw. These creatures are all products of natural selection honed over millions of years. For example, an ancestor of the harmless milk snake may have developed the coloration of the poisonous coral snake through a random mutation. These mutants would have had a higher survival rate than their non-mutated peers, thereby giving birth to more baby milk snakes with the same pattern. These babies, in turn, would have been safer from predators and would have successfully produced more offspring with the same colorful pattern, and so on. Over many generations, all milk snakes would come to have the same coloration as coral snakes. In doing so, they have perfected the dishonest signal. The handicap principle clarifies it all. While I call myself an investor, an evolutionary biologist would not be remiss in branding me a signal decoder. The only things investors can rely on to assess a company are the signals emitted by it, some direct and others indirect, some comprehensible and others bizarre, some ongoing and others delayed, and some quantitative and others qualitative. Companies relay signals in the form of press releases, media interviews, analyst meetings, earnings calls, annual reports, dividends, buybacks, acquisitions, SEC filings, newspaper boasts, and so much more. Most investors receive the same signals from companies since the capital market regulators have ensured the standardization and transparency of communication. So how is it that the long-term performance of different investors who are all within a small band of seemingly prodigious intellectual capacity varies significantly? Among the many reasons for this variance, one that stands out for me is an investor's ability to decode honest signals from dishonest ones, figure 7.1. Acting on a dishonest signal and ignoring an honest one can lead to hunger or death in the natural world, a fate not too dissimilar to a fund's performance. But how is an investor supposed to distinguish between an honest signal and a dishonest one? Let's turn to the Israeli evolutionary biologist Amatz Zahavi for an exquisitely elegant answer. But first, a brief background on signals. In the early and middle parts of the 20th century, ethology is the study of animal behavior, believed that signals were essentially honest indicators of senders' underlying motives. However, in the 1970s, two British scientists, Richard Dawkins and John Krebs, took an almost diametrically opposite view, claiming that signals were best seen as a deceitful manipulation by a sender to alter the behavior of the receiver for the sender's benefit. On the other hand, the receiver was trying to fathom the true motive of the sender and plotting its own moves. According to Dawkins and Krebs, this leads to an arms race in which the sender and receiver are constantly trying to outdo each other. However, Amatz Zahavi rejected this pessimistic view of signals. In 1975, he proposed his famous handicap principle, which explains how and why honest signals can evolve in the natural world where animals are presumably trying to deceive one another. Zahavi's profound observation was that when signals for a particular trait are costly to produce, he rightly termed such signals handicaps and cannot be matched by another with a lower quality of that trait, they can be deemed honest. That may sound logical, but science, unlike the investment profession, needs empirical evidence to support its tall claims. The scientific community did not fully accept the handicap principle until 15 years after the publication of the article in which Zahavi presented it. In 1990, two articles by the Scottish biologist Alan Grafen finally turned the tide in its favor. The best route to understanding the handicap principle is through carotenoids. Carotenoids are a class of pigments ranging from yellow to orange to red. They also provide health benefits by acting as antioxidants and strengthening the immune system. Animals can't synthesize carotenoids within their bodies and must procure them by eating plants, bacteria, or fungi. Carotenoids play a strong signaling role, and scientists have studied their effect extensively in three species: the house finch, a bird, the three-spined stickleback, a fish, and the guppy. If the handicap principle is accurate, we should be able to confirm the following three hypotheses. 1. Females are differentially attracted to males with redder or brighter hues. 2. Males with a redder coloration are fitter than paler males, and 3. It is costly for healthy males to produce a deep red pigment. In the species studied, researchers have shown conclusively that females react more favorably to males that display a deeper carotenoid pigmentation. Male house finches, for example, have 3 patches of carotenoid pigmentation on their body, on the crown, throat, and rump. Each patch varies in coloration from pale yellow to bright red. Experiments clearly show that female house finches prefer to consort with redder males, whether this redness results from natural diet or artificial dyes. This finding supports the first hypothesis, receiver response. To provide support for the second hypothesis, signal honesty, scientists demonstrated that well-fed house finches developed a deeper red coloration compared to those fed less nutritious food. When researchers exposed 3-spined sticklebacks to parasites, the ones with a higher load of infectious ciliate had a significant decrease in red coloration. Other experiments like the one by Godin and McDonough described earlier have found evidence for the same phenomenon in guppies. Thus, deeper carotenoid pigmentation does seem to indicate better overall health. Let's now deal with the last and most crucial hypothesis, whether honest signals impose a cost on the signaler. Over the years, biologists have unearthed 4 possible costs of deeper carotenoid pigmentation. First, carotenoid levels in fish scales or bird plumage are directly correlated with the amount of carotenoid in the animal's gut. Thus, the more time an animal spends eating nutritious food, the redder the pigment, but also the greater the cost incurred. Second, since carotenoids have health benefits and are needed to ward off disease and parasites, redirecting them from the gut to dead tissues like scales or feathers for display purposes is a costly maneuver for the animal. Third, displaying carotenoid pigmentation involves the cost of processing carotenoids in the gut and then transporting them to the feathers or scales. Hence, only those animals that have eaten enough nutritious food are up to the task. The fourth obvious cost is the risk of death. A deep red coloration charms females and foes alike. In laboratory experiments, trout have been shown to be more likely to attack redder sticklebacks, and blue acaricichlids are more likely to kill guppies with greater carotenoid pigmentation. Thus, according to the handicap principle, redder male house finches attract more mates, presumably because their message to females is, "Look how healthy and virile I am so darned red." It would be very costly and potentially even suicidal for a weak or diseased house finch to produce more carotenoid pigmentation given the diversion of resources required. Obviously, male house finches do not consciously decide to produce redder colors. The healthier ones simply have enough nutritional resources to produce the pigmentation and the weaker ones don't. Ditto for the brightly colored male guppy in the example mentioned earlier. Or the dude with the shiny red Ferrari. All of them show off ornaments that are very expensive to produce or procure and hence accurately communicate the signaler's well-being. And herein lies Zahavi's lesson for us investors. Lend credence only to those signals from companies that are costly to produce. That, however, is easier said than done. What does costly to produce mean in the context of a corporate environment? What is the equivalent of a peacock's resplendent tail? A shiny new corporate headquarters, an industry award, a growing market value, a CEO's Forbes profile, or something else? I am a practicing investor, not a finance academic. I cannot offer a regression model proven to be statistically relevant, but I can offer the practical ways in which my team and I distinguish between honest and dishonest signals. Dishonest signals galore. Let's start with real-life examples of dishonest signals, that is, those that do not reliably communicate the trait they are supposed to. A dishonest signal does not imply that the sender is dishonest, although they might be. It simply means that the signal may not communicate what it is supposed to. Just as in the natural world, an honest person in a business setting can send a dishonest signal without necessarily having a bad intention. When we evaluate a business to make an investment or divestment, we ignore the following types of signals or assign them a very low weight in our overall evaluation. Press releases. On July 29, 2014, Apple's press release claimed that the company had updated the MacBook Pro with Retina display, note the capital R and D. Should investors have cared about this news? Maybe you would have been impressed if you were a discerning consumer, but how would this announcement have helped an investor decide if Apple was a good company to buy? You could argue that the press release indicated Apple's prowess in keeping up with the latest technology trends, and so it was, in fact, quite informative. But how many investors or non-techies in general even know or understand what Retina display means? I don't. Even if Retina display, whatever it is, were to turn out to be a cool new technology, how is anyone to conclude from this information that the MacBook Pro would become a success? And to belabor the point, even if an investor did understand what Retina display meant, and even if they concluded from various sources that it was likely to be a great success, how would this knowledge help them decide whether to buy Apple shares unless they could accurately forecast the profits and cash flows to be made from the increased sales of the MacBook Pro as a result of this technology? A press release is probably the most used, or should I say abused, signal given out by companies. The reason? It does not cost anything for the company to be in the press regularly apart from the retainer for the PR agency, which is usually an annual fixed expense. Many companies resort to regular press releases and interviews to share news of product launches, management changes, strategy shifts, and organization changes. First, I am deeply suspicious of companies regularly in the press. Don't they have anything better to do? But even those that are not professionals at managing the press through their public relations consultants rarely have anything helpful to say for a long-term investor. Second, press releases can be, and frequently are, more insidious than the harmless MacBook Pro announcement. Many press releases appear to reveal significant information that a long-term investor must absorb but turn out to be empty boasts at best and deliberate obfuscation at worst. Take the example of a Unilever press release from January 20, 2015. The headline states confidently profitable growth in tougher markets. A detailed look at the press release left me scratching my confused head. I assume you agree that developed markets like the United States and Western Europe should be classified as tough because they are mature, have high competitive intensity, and have growth challenges. But if you read the press release carefully, you will notice that sales in 2014 declined by 0.8% in developed markets. Sales did grow 5.7% in emerging markets, though even this growth was lower than in 2013, but I would not call emerging markets tough. Interestingly, the press release fails to mention which markets, according to Unilever, are tough and which are easy. Maybe you disagree with me and prefer to call emerging markets tough. Alright, let's go ahead with that definition. But then how does one explain a sales decline of 20% in the fourth quarter in China? A slowdown of this magnitude, especially in a market as large as China, may be relevant information for investors, but as we saw, it is nowhere in the headlines. Unilever's overall sales in 2014, by the way, declined by 2.7%. Was this the cause for celebration that the press release seemed to imply? The bottom line is that making investment or divestment decisions based on a press release can be harmful to a fund's bottom line. We treat press releases as what they are, a cheap signal given by companies to make competitors envious and to attract investors, employees, and customers. We don't give them any importance. Management interviews in the media. It was June 13, 2019. The 51-year-old visionary CEO was giving an interview to Bloomberg's Matt Miller on the sidelines of Europe's most prestigious digital and tech conference in Berlin. His company was a giant in payment processing, and from being a scrappy startup in the early 2000s, its soaring market value had enabled it to win an entry into the coveted DAX index in 2018. Its stock price had tripled over the past 3 years, valuing it at about 18 billion euros. 23 of 29 research analysts covering the company had a buy rating on it. Over the years, the Financial Times business newspaper and some short sellers had raised issues about its accounting practices, but the company had brushed aside all the allegations. In this context, Matt Miller was conducting an impressive interview. Rather than fawning over the celebrity CEO, Miller posed some tough questions on the sources of the company's growth, its questionable corporate governance practices, and the reasons for the persistent rumors about the company's lax compliance processes. The relaxed and confident CEO looked Miller directly in the eyes and answered every question with remarkable clarity and precision. He assured Miller that Asia was the primary growth engine, its new sales were up 160%, and, contrary to the popular view, it was also witnessing growth in Europe. The CEO came down heavily on his detractors, reminding Miller that his share price had delivered a 36% annualized return over the past 14 years. He was confident that his compliance staff of 200 were world-class and explained that the company was investing heavily in technology to enable digital monitoring of transactions. Almost exactly a year after this interview, on June 23, 2020, the CEO was arrested on charges of criminal fraud. The company filed for insolvency on June 25, 2020. The CEO's name? Marcus Braun. The company? Wirecard. Braun and Wirecard had been lying for years. But Braun's hero worship was so deep and widespread in Germany that the national regulator, BaFin, filed a criminal complaint against Financial Times reporters in 2019, accusing them of market manipulation. Braun was a national champion, so how could he be wrong? You can watch the Bloomberg interview on Bloomberg TV. Braun comes across as a well-meaning, smart, and thoughtful leader, clearly well ahead of the competition on digital payments. Yes, I know I am cherry-picking one management interview to show how useless they are as a species. But I hope you will not dispute that Braun showed remarkable skills as an interviewee. He reduced the complex global operations of Wirecard to sound bites like scalable, digital payments, risk management, and innovation. I am almost certain he resonated with viewers, many of whom were surely also investors in the company. While I have taken an extreme example, it highlights two common features of almost all management interviews. First, they are an exercise in making the management look good. And many of them are good. But as you must know from your own experience, looking good is not the same as being good. Second, these kinds of interviews can provide us a lot of information about the interviewee, dog's name and favorite dish included, and the company, but not a lot that is relevant to an investor. For example, Braun's statements, in many areas, we are pioneers and we are concentrating on technology innovations, may be of literary, academic, sociological, or cultural interest, but what do they tell me, an investor? Nothing. I should be impressed by these quotes as a viewer, but not as someone who wishes to invest in Wirecard. Have you ever read management interviews that claim they aren't innovative, don't have the best business leaders, aren't leveraging technology, aren't customer-focused, don't treat their employees well, don't listen to shareholders, make bad capital allocations, and ignore the value of making sustainable investments? I haven't. But the fact remains that most of the businesses I have encountered in my life as a consultant and as an investor have been deeply flawed in more ways than one. They either don't know it or won't admit to it. Excellence is rare in this world, including the business world. You just won't know it if you are relying on management interviews. I am not saying I don't read, or listen to, or watch interviews of business leaders. I do. But I read them for the same reason I read articles on Brexit, running, films, and the latest Trump tantrum, to gossip with friends, to pass the time on a Sunday afternoon, and for general interest in our fascinating world. Not for investing. Investor conferences and road shows. Assume for a moment that you have had no exposure to the equity markets. The industry is facing a major problem and you are asked to solve it. The company management teams seem to be spending too much time entertaining questions from myriad investors. And serious investors complain that their calls to companies remain unanswered because the management teams are sick and tired of answering the same questions. The investors, as well as company management, waste a lot of time and air miles meeting each other across various cities. What would be the best way to ensure that company information is shared efficiently across all interested investors? If you are a smart person, which you are, after all, you are reading this book, right? You will most probably come up with the following answer. Invite many companies and investors to a single location, preferably a city with good flight connections. And let them interact formally through presentations and informally at lunches and dinners. Well, congratulations. You have the right solution. This is exactly what the industry does by running conferences ranging in length from 1 to 5 days. Tens, sometimes even hundreds of companies converge to make a series of presentations to visiting investors. Roadshows are a scaled-down version of these conferences during which the company management typically visits investors at their offices. Since most investors have offices in large cities like New York, San Francisco, London, and Tokyo, a company can usually meet 6 to 8 investors in a single day. What do you think most company managers want when they meet investors? They want the investors to buy their stock so that the share price moves up. Are they likely to present a balanced view of their business? It would be easier to believe in Santa Claus. My experience tells me that most of these conferences and road shows are an excuse for the company to show off. In a 30-minute presentation, the company management will sing paeans of their strategy for 29.9 minutes. They will spend the remaining 0.1 minute drinking water or, if they are feeling generous, mentioning a couple of risks in such hushed tones that you will miss them if you sneeze. I know I am exaggerating, but not by much, I can assure you. And I don't blame them. If I were them, I would behave the same way. A conference or a road show is a dishonest signal because it does not cost the management team anything to present an overly optimistic view of their company, and so that is what they do. It is a chest-thumping marketing jamboree, not a forum to evaluate investment opportunities dispassionately. Do we at Nalanda attend conferences and meet management teams during roadshows? We absolutely do. But we employ a stratospheric level of discounting to company presentations and treat these conferences and road shows as a starting point for evaluating interesting businesses, not as a shortcut to building robust investment theses. One of the ways we use conferences is to meet our portfolio companies' competitors. Are they launching new products? Are they entering new segments? What is their approach to acquisitions? How are they planning to allocate capital? Are they becoming better than the company we own? But we never exit a management meeting in this kind of dog-and-pony show claiming that we have found a winner or loser and that we should place an order to buy or sell. Investor conferences and road shows are dishonest signals not because management are dishonest, most of them are upright folks doing their job, but because it does not cost anything to spin the best story possible in a 45-minute presentation to an audience that is partly brain-dead from rushing from one meeting to another. Earnings guidance. Many publicly listed companies project their profits after tax, also called earnings, over the next fiscal year. For example, in January 2019, during their earnings call, they will project their earnings for the full year of 2019. In subsequent calls, usually held after every quarter, they update this guidance depending on their recent performance and outlook. Analysts and investors follow earnings guidance quite seriously, and stock prices react promptly to the under- or overachievement of this guidance. Investors and analysts love earnings guidance from companies. In fact, according to an article from PR Newswire, 77% of the 180 analysts surveyed wanted companies to provide guidance. Analysts are smart folks, so you must be thinking that they can learn a lot from the future pronouncements of companies. Sadly, they don't. What do you think a management team's projections for the next year are based on? In fact, on what basis does anyone make forecasts about the near to medium term? The recent past? A hope for a better future? Spreadsheet manipulation? All of the above? Take your pick. Earnings guidance is a dishonest signal even though the management may fervently believe in it. It is cheap, easy to produce, and needs little effort to deliver. In my career spanning more than 3 decades, I have sat on the boards of more than 24 companies ranging from a market value of $5 million to about $50 billion. At the beginning of every fiscal year, all these company management teams usually present their budgets for the year. And I don't remember a single occasion when a management team hit its target. Let me repeat that, not a single occasion. I am not kidding. The businesses either exceeded their budgets or underperformed. And they had no way of knowing which would happen. There is a simple reason why earnings are so hard to predict: multiplicative probability. Earnings, or profit after tax, is the last line item on a company profit and loss statement. We can calculate profit after tax after deducting from revenues the cash expenses, non-cash expenses like depreciation and amortization, financial charges, and taxes. Thus, the management needs to hit its target on all these line items to hope for an accurate earnings guidance. Many of these are not even under the management's control. For example, interest rates may change, thereby affecting the interest income or expense. A global company selling in international markets can significantly undershoot or overshoot its budget owing to currency movements. But even the line items that you think are in management's control aren't usually so. Take revenues. Let's say the management has confidently projected a certain level of sales for next year. But what if the economy grows faster than predicted? Or slower? What if the competitor launches a price war? What if one of the factories shuts down because of a fire? What if the company's best sales manager, accounting for 7% of sales, falls ill suddenly? None of these what-ifs is theoretical, they have all happened in businesses for which I have been a board member or investor. One may now assert that the costs incurred by a business should surely be under management's control. After all, costs are all internal, aren't they? Nope. Take raw materials. A manufacturing company using a wide variety of plastics and metals is subject to commodity price fluctuations. A logistics provider is held hostage to petroleum prices. And a services company needs to bend to the vagaries of labor market prices, especially if it is using part-time staff. Sales and advertising expenses seem more controllable. A marketing manager can decide to spend $10 million on advertising next year, and that's that, right? Not so fast. If a new venture-backed competitor emerges that offers a similar product at a 25% discount, the marketing manager may have to react by increasing the marketing budget significantly. Recall your basic probability class. You will remember that when many events are supposed to occur simultaneously, X and Y and Z, the cumulative probability is arrived at by multiplying all the individual probabilities. Let's assume that the management you are evaluating is truly unique in its ability to forecast and their predictive accuracy is 80%. Thus, the probability of hitting the right earnings number if it is to be broken into just 5 component parts, revenues, discounts, employee expenses, manufacturing expenses, and sales expenses would be less than 33%. 0.85. In reality, the number of line items before we arrive at the earnings number is much more than 5. So how would it be possible even for a world-class management team to keep hitting its earnings guidance numbers every quarter or every year? It is almost a mathematical impossibility. So what is the point of the financial community's laser focus on this number? I do not blame company management or analysts for this disease. Yes, I call it a disease because it infects almost everyone in the asset management industry and prevents investors from performing to their full potential. The blame for this malady should fall squarely on us, the investment community, which exerts enormous pressure on businesses and sell-side firms to come up with a single earnings number. A McKinsey analysis of earnings guidance reaches the following unflattering conclusion: our analysis of the perceived benefits of issuing frequent earnings guidance found no evidence that it affects valuation multiples, improves shareholder returns, or reduces share price volatility. The beneficiaries of earnings guidance appear to be neither the investors nor the management, only the brokers. The report concludes the only significant effect we observed is an increase in trading volumes when companies start issuing guidance. And that's not all. The sad irony of earnings guidance is this: a company consistently meeting its earnings guidance should be seen with an even greater degree of skepticism. Why? General Electric, GE. In the latter half of the 20th century, GE was one of the most revered companies on the planet. And under Jack Welch, the CEO of GE from 1981 to 2001, it scaled heights never seen by any company on the planet. Under his leadership, the company increased its market value more than 40 times over 2 decades. In August 2000, GE's market value was $601 billion, making it the most valuable company on Earth. By the end of 2021, it was a shadow of its former self, having lost about 85% of its value. Many things went wrong at GE, and this is not the place to list them, but one of the most striking things about GE during the Jack Welch era was its ability to hit its earnings target quarter after quarter, year after year. Analysts and investors loved GE. When GE declared it would meet its earnings the next year, it always did. As Welch said in an interview with Carol Loomis of Fortune, what investor would want to buy a conglomerate like GE unless its earnings were predictable? The company had become so blasé and arrogant about managing its numbers that the CFO, Dennis Dammerman, was bold enough to admit to Fortune, "Okay, we're going to take these large gains and offset them with discretionary decisions with restructurings." He was smoothing his profits in plain sight. The managers were under enormous pressure to hit their earnings targets. When Jeff Immelt, the CEO after Jack Welch, took over the plastics division at GE and found that the previous management had been fudging the profits, he chose to keep quiet. He was a rising star within GE and knew that not meeting his budget was not an option. GE had a special purpose vehicle called Edison Conduit that was supposed to be independent of the company but wasn't. GE Capital guaranteed Edison's liabilities, effectively making it a GE company. Why did it exist? Its stated purpose was to issue commercial paper, but its main objective was to create profits out of thin air. It periodically bought assets from GE Capital at higher prices than the book value, thereby showing profits. But how can a company buy its own assets to show profits, you ask? Good question. Today it can't, it would be considered fraud. But the company was exploiting an accounting loophole of the pre-Enron era. In 2002, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act passed, and many accounting tricks being used by GE became illegal. Jack Welch had timed his retirement almost perfectly in 2001. Jeff Immelt, the new CEO, never got the leeway from the accountants that his boss had and kept missing investor expectations. GE's stock price went into a decline that hasn't been arrested more than 2 decades after Welch's retirement. I am not suggesting that all of GE's problems resulted from its guidance culture, but I think it played a significant role. When business managers are hyper-focused on meeting quarterly numbers, their long-term orientation takes a back seat. When a company is desperate to make an acquisition just to meet its earnings, it can overpay for a bad asset. When a manager is unable to speak the truth about accounting obfuscations, they pile up over time. Last, let's assume for a moment that a company can accurately predict its earnings without any accounting shenanigans of the kind employed by GE. So what? Should it matter to a long-term investor that the next year's earnings will grow at 5% or decline by 10%? We base our assessment of a company on its riskiness, competitive moat, quality of financials, and management integrity, not on its ability to forecast earnings accurately. We know it is very hard to predict earnings consistently, so why measure anyone on it? We have never bothered to assess earnings guidance from companies and have tried to persuade many of our portfolio companies to cease providing guidance. The results, I will admit, have been mixed. Old habits die hard. Face-to-face meetings with management. In mid-2015, Valeant, a pharmaceutical company run by a McKinsey alum called Mike Pearson, was the darling of the stock market and had a market value of about $90 billion. Just 5 years before, in 2010, its market value was only about $5 billion. There was no business magazine that had not covered the stupendous success of Valeant. Nothing could stop this juggernaut acquiring pharma companies and cutting costs to the bone to enhance profits. Investors loved Mike and his seemingly unbeatable strategy, and marquee investors like Pershing Square, Sequoia, and ValueAct were big fans. Charlie Munger, however, was having none of it. He rightly spotted that Valeant's debt-fueled acquisition spree was a recipe for disaster. Combined with Valeant's numerous unethical business practices, example, raising the prices of life-saving drugs many times after acquiring them, he opined that Valeant would fail spectacularly sooner or later. In a May 2016 interview with Fox Business, Munger called the company worse than a sewer. Munger's views irritated some of Valeant's largest shareholders, including Bill Ackman, the CIO of Pershing Square. He wrote a lengthy letter to Munger in April 2015 requesting him to meet with Mike Pearson, but Munger refused. Munger did not need a meeting to detect the honest signals of Valeant's corruption and incompetence. Valeant had its comeuppance soon after and by mid-2016 had lost 90% of its value. Bill Ackman's Pershing Square took a loss of $3 billion on Valeant. Why were so many experienced investors blind to the problems that Munger had highlighted publicly? Why could Munger correctly predict Valeant's demise without meeting Mike Pearson when many of Valeant's board members and investors continued to be passionate supporters? My hypothesis is this: Mike Pearson was a fantastic salesperson. Correction. He was probably one of the best salespeople to have enamored Wall Street. The smartest people lost their sense of judgment when faced with Mike Pearson's persuasive skills. Valeant's honest signals of its myriad problems remained undetected or ignored in the light of the dishonest signals emitted by Mike Pearson in face-to-face meetings, which by definition were cheap to produce. Again, I am not asserting that Mike Pearson was dishonest. Maybe he genuinely believed what he said. It doesn't really matter. The reason Munger was right was that he knew that any face-to-face meeting is a dishonest signal. This claim that face-to-face meetings aren't a reliable signal may seem strange at first glance given the importance of management teams for most investors, whether they are venture capitalists, private equity funds, or mutual funds. Many investors take pride in judging management teams based on a single meeting, and if you are one such investor, good for you. I am not. The odds are that many investors think they are good at judging people, but they generally aren't. Let's assume we encounter a genius who is genuinely able to judge a person's character based on a face-to-face meeting. My assertion here is even if they possess this rare skill, it will be useless in a management meeting and will not enable them to become a better investor. The reason is simple: any signal that management gives during a meeting is a cheap signal requiring minimal effort. And since it is cheap, the signal may be dishonest even if the management is not. For example, management may believe that their product is high quality and they will say so in a meeting. Would you believe their assertion, or would you do independent checks to assess the product's quality? Management may genuinely believe that their recent underperformance relative to domestic competition is a result of their focus on overseas markets. If you are a good judge of people and conclude that management is telling the truth, would you take their stated belief to be true? Management knows what you want to hear, and quite often that is what you will hear. We do meet management teams. We use these meetings to build relationships and to understand their corporate history and some of their past decisions. We never use management meetings to build an investment case or test key hypotheses because we know we will hear what they want us to hear, not what we want to know. Invoking Zahavi to interpret signals that matter. It looks like we are in a bit of soup here. If we can't rely on press releases, investor conferences, earnings guidance, or management meetings, what kinds of signals can we, as investors, trust? Let's go back to Zahavi, whose assertion about the natural world is highly relevant to the investing world. We should trust only costly signals emitted by companies because they are the only ones we can rely on. But what signals are costly to produce and hence reliable? Broadly, there are two. We know the first one from Chapter 5. Past operating and financial performance. I will not rehash the logic I outlined in Chapter 5 for visiting the past to assess a business and industry. Suffice it to say that we at Nalanda treat the past as one of two critical and reliable signals for our investment and divestment decisions. The past has happened. It is there for us to see. It is an undeniable signal of the company's actions and outcomes. The problem, of course, is that investors seem intently focused on receiving signals about the future. Let's take the example of a ubiquitous phenomenon in the world of investing: conference calls. I know I discussed conference calls in Chapter 5, but it's important to revisit the phenomenon in the light of honest and dishonest signals. A quarterly call is a strong signal sent by the management to the broader analyst and investor community. The CEO, CFO, and some other key business leaders typically attend the calls. If there is one place where you can get all your answers, this is it. Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Jack Dorsey formerly of Twitter, Tim Cook of Apple, Elon Musk of Tesla, all these business leaders regularly attend their company's quarterly calls. Let's take a concrete example. Chevron, one of the world's largest oil companies, had revenues of about $140 billion and a market value of about $190 billion in 2019. The management held a conference call for investors and analysts on January 31, 2020 to highlight its performance. The analysts and investors asked 29 questions. What percentage of these do you think were about the future? More than 70%. Here is a small sample of these future-directed questions. Can you talk a little bit more about how you think about volumes in 2020? Remember that this call is from the start of 2020. I was curious where else we could see some upside in the portfolio in 2020. As you continue to shed assets and capital intensity is lowered, just wondering how repeatable outsized dividend growth could be over the long term. In and of themselves, the questions on volumes, potential upside, and potential dividend growth are important. But just because a question is important does not mean it has a good or reliable answer. I want to know my fund returns next year, but I would be foolish to pick a number. Let's take the questions on volumes and potential upside. Chevron management gave a lengthy answer to these queries, but essentially said that volume growth would be in the same ballpark as in previous years. Little did they, or anyone else for that matter, know that the COVID-19 pandemic would strike or that the price of and demand for oil would drop precipitously. Chevron would end 2020 with a net loss of $5.5 billion compared to a net profit of $2.9 billion in 2019. In the fourth quarter of 2020, revenue had dropped to $25 billion from $35 billion a year earlier, a reduction of almost 30%. During the conference call, management predicted capital spending of $21 billion in 2020. The actual number? $13 billion. All the questions related to Chevron's performance in 2020 and beyond essentially turned out to be useless. I know I am being unfair because I have chosen the year of the pandemic to talk about the difficulty of making predictions. But by doing so, I want to highlight the absurdity of the financial sector's focus on a company's future. No business could have predicted the calamities of 2020, and Chevron was no exception. We can assume that Chevron management are honest and willing to answer questions to the best of their abilities. But how can any signal they give about the future be anything but cheap and hence dishonest, given that pontification of future events does not demand much effort? Any talk of the future is unreliable and just speculation. If I were in a senior management position at Chevron and asked these questions, my replies would have been no different. The problem is not with Chevron. It is with us, the financial industry folks, who want to coerce the management of companies to do the undoable and then blame them when they don't meet our impossible standards. An honest signal is not our margin will be 15% next year, but our average margin was 12% over the last 10 years. An honest signal is not we will have robust free cash flows starting 2 years from now, but we generated free cash flow only 1 year in the last decade. An honest signal is not we will launch 6 new products next year, but in our recent history, we have launched an average of 1 product every 2 years. No stories, no projections, just facts about the past. Because she said so. While most people show positive bias in evaluating themselves and their kids, they can be remarkably candid and accurate when it comes to analyzing other people and their spouses. As an investor, we have used this well-proven human quality to solicit positive and negative signals on companies. A good reputation is a very costly signal and hence an honest one, because building a name for oneself in any industry consumes enormous management time and effort over many years, if not decades. Therefore, before we make an investment, we spend many months speaking to dealers, competitors, ex-employees, suppliers, and industry experts to get a holistic understanding of a company and its industry. We consider these scuttlebutt signals to be sincere for two reasons. First, in general, I have found that few people have an incentive to lie unless they bear a serious grudge against a company. If a competitor is impressed with the company you are evaluating, it will say so and give you many reasons for saying so. Second, once we have performed enough interviews with people connected to the company but not necessarily from the company, we start to get a good sense of the management's reputation and quality. I learned a valuable scuttlebutt lesson in 2008, less than a year after starting Nalanda. We had become deeply interested in a manufacturing company in India with a market value of almost $2 billion. The company had a very high return on capital over its long history, claimed to design and manufacture products that others couldn't, and had a roster of marquee clients. The financial community was all praises for the businesses. We met the management and came away suitably impressed with the articulation of its strategy and philosophy. Our analysis of past results and performance yielded only positive news. We started talking to the company's customers, who were largely in the healthcare sector. We were surprised when all the customers we spoke to categorized it as a commodity supplier, not a specialist manufacturer. They told us that they were buying from this company only because it offered the lowest prices, not because it sold the latest high-tech products. It was clear to us after a few customer calls that the company had been resorting to hyperbole when it touted the quality of its products and depth of customer relationships. We also spotted a strange anomaly in its balance sheet. A number of receivable days of 270 seemed too high for a company that claimed to have a strong relationship with its customers. Why would customers take 9 months to pay? When we asked the company, their glib response was that this was customary in the healthcare industry. During our scuttlebutt calls, we checked with the customers, and all of them told us that they were paying the company within 90 days as per their agreement. Where was the cash hiding for the remaining 180 days? Our third scuttlebutt signal turned out to be the most damaging. We were able to interview the company's previous head of sales, who had resigned a few months earlier. When we asked him about company performance, he quipped, "You are financial sector folks. So maybe you can explain this anomaly to me." I was the global sales head and was responsible for 100% of company revenues. But my actual delivered sales numbers for the quarter were always much lower than what the company stated in its quarterly financial results. How could it be so? We didn't need to hear any more. The market value of this business is down 98% from its peak in early 2008. If we had relied only on the company's stated past financial and operating performance and had not performed our extensive scuttlebutt research, maybe Nalanda would not exist today. It may not have been possible to recover from making a dud investment of $150 to $200 million. As an aside, the great investor Philip A. Fisher first popularized the scuttlebutt approach in his 1958 classic, Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits. In Chapter 2, What Scuttlebutt Can Do, he asserts, the business grapevine is a remarkable thing. It is amazing what an accurate picture of the relative points of strength and weakness of each company in an industry can be obtained from a representative cross-section of the opinions of those who in one way or another are concerned with any particular company. Truer words have rarely been uttered. Back to Bolton? Let's get back to the mystery of the underperformance of the £460 million fund launched by Anthony Bolton in 2010. I deliberately withheld a key piece of information from you earlier. Bolton launched his fund in China, not the United Kingdom. I don't know what he was thinking, but having shown his mettle in the United Kingdom, I am assuming Bolton wanted a new challenge. But China is not the United Kingdom, especially when it comes to the behavior and track record of listed companies. As an aside, India is not that different from China in this regard. You may have heard of Luckin Coffee, which was supposed to be the Starbucks of China. It claimed to have a more scalable model than Starbucks because it sold cheap coffee, primarily for takeout and delivery. It had positioned itself as a tech company because customers could order through its app. Many marquee investors, including one of China's largest venture capital firms, Joy Capital, and Singapore's sovereign wealth fund, GIC, had invested in Luckin at a valuation of $1 billion. The company went public in the United States in May 2019, and by January 2020, its stock price had reached $50, valuing the company at more than $12 billion. In late January, the famous short seller Muddy Waters released a scathing report on Luckin alleging that its sales numbers were falsely elevated. To make matters worse, Luckin's auditor, Ernst & Young, unearthed fraudulent behavior by Luckin's senior employees. By May 2020, the stock had crashed more than 95%. Luckin, unfortunately, is not an exception. Chinese companies like China Agritech, China Green Agriculture, China Integrated Energy, G-Sex Techidu, Aichi, Longwei Petroleum, Orient Paper, Puda Coal, and Sino Clean Energy have all been accused of accounting irregularities or outright fraud. There are probably as many explanations as there are experts to account for Anthony Bolton's failure in China. Mine is this: Bolton confused the Chinese signals for British ones. He did not realize that the signals from many Chinese companies were fundamentally dishonest and that he should have been much more skeptical of their veracity. In an interview with South China Morning Post, the Morningstar analyst Zhao Hu pointed out that not one or two but three investee companies of Bolton's China fund had reeled under accounting and product recall scandals. Bolton was accustomed to honest signals from British companies, but in Zhao Hu's words, obviously he had not discounted enough risk into his investments in those small and proven Chinese firms. Wasp and Orchid Redux. There is almost never a clear winner in the arms race between the senders and receivers of signals in the natural world. You may have heard of cuckoos leaving their eggs in the nests of other bird species so that someone else can rear their chicks. The signals here are the size, shape, and color of the cuckoo egg, which match those of the eggs of some other bird species. However, scientists have found that some of the parasitized bird species have not allowed themselves to be exploited. They have evolved to produce eggs that are distinctly different, even compared to eggs of their own species. As a result, they recognize cuckoo eggs as interlopers. They have evolved a way to detect the dishonest signal from cuckoos. This race has no winner, and there will probably never be one. In sharp contrast, in the business world, the senders of signals, the companies, are clearly winning over the receivers, us, the gullible investors. No wonder our community performs poorly compared to the broader market. What should we long-term investors do? Ignore the green frog and heed the guppy. Chapter Summary. Evolutionary theory has taught me that reimagining investing requires us to differentiate between the honest and dishonest signals of businesses. 1. In nature, the sender of a signal attempts to influence the behavior of the receiver. For the receiver, differentiating between an honest and a dishonest signal can be the difference between life and death. 2. A green frog mimicking the low-pitched croak of its larger rival is a dishonest signal, whereas the conspicuous coloration of a male guppy is an honest indicator of its health and virility. 3. Zahavi's handicap principle contends that a signal that is costly to produce is honest and can thus be relied upon by the receiver. The cost may be in the form of additional resources required to produce the signal or an increased risk of mortality. 4. As investors, we too are bombarded with signals, many of which are dishonest. Examples include press releases, management meetings and interviews, investor conferences, and earnings guidance. All these signals attempt to favorably impress investors and are generally quite easy to produce. We ignore all of them. 5. We rely exclusively on honest signals from businesses that, as in the natural world, are costly to produce. These include past operating and financial performance and scuttlebutt signals from suppliers, customers, competitors, ex-employees, and industry experts.